Zachary didn't know how long he'd been out cold for, but the pain he felt in his head and the aching body, those were the first things he noticed when he came to. He felt his forehead. There had been a cut. He thought to himself, I can tell I banged my head on something. But how? And then there was something else he noticed. A horrible, putrid aroma. He took a couple of minutes for his vision to focus, but where he ended up, he didn't know. He didn't recognize this place at all. He found himself in what looked like a living room. Only the furniture was all dirty, rotten, dusty. Everything was unkempt. There was something about the windows while he looked around. The windows were nailed shut and boarded up. There was even barbed wire around some of them. Something about this place told Zachary that he knew he had to get out of this place. He had to tread carefully because he had a strong feeling he wasn't alone in this place. He reached for the door that led into the corridor. The putrid smell seems to be getting stronger here. He looked around the corridor as he tread carefully. The corridor was dimly lit, littered with all sorts of rubbish, old newspapers, tin cans, mouldy food, and, for some reason, there were marks in the floor and walls, like something sharp had struck them. Zachary jumped out of his skin when he heard a noise, but it was only one of the tin cans that toppled off a pile and rolled back down the corridor behind him. Shaken up a little, Zachary continued onwards. There were more doors along the corridor, but he didn't feel like exploring each room. All he wanted to do was get the hell out of this place. There was a door at the far end, and hoped that this would lead to the way out. He reached the door, which was just open ajar, and pushed it open slowly. He looked into what looked like the kitchen. The smell, the smell was unbearable here. Zachary only took a couple of steps when he suddenly ducked behind one of the counters in the middle of the kitchen. He peeked. There was someone in the kitchen also. There was a man there at the sink, down at the far end of the kitchen. A heavily built man. He was quite tall, wearing a stained shirt and trousers, and he appeared to be wearing an apron. There was something else about this man's appearance, but it was hard to tell since he was standing in front of the one window that wasn't boarded up. It looked like he had some kind of bag over his head, and there was a rope around his neck at the base of the bag, breathing heavily. The man was cleaning something at the sink, or at least that's what it looked like. There was a doorway leading outside to the right, and it looked like his means of escape. But how he was going to get to it without this man knowing? The man was only a few feet away from the door. Zachary then had an idea. He saw a couple of tin cans beside him, picked one up, and threw it back over towards the corridor he had just been in. The man heard it and swung around with what sounded like a wheezing noise. He then reached over and pulled up a big axe and stomped across the kitchen towards the corridor, slamming the door behind him as he left the kitchen. This was Zachary's chance. He made for the door. It was locked. Zachary started to panic. The door was locked tight, and the windows in the kitchen were either boarded up, nailed shut, or shielded with barbed wire. The man would come back at any second. Zachary searched the kitchen quickly, looking for wherever the key could be. He opened drawers, checked the cupboards, but there was no sign of a key. He heard what sounded like the axe striking against the wall in the corridor. The man's heavy footsteps were returning, and Zachary had to hide somewhere quick. He saw one of the cupboards in the center of the room he opened earlier and slid down into them, closing the doors as best he could, and stayed hidden. The man's heavy footsteps entered the kitchen. Peeking through the gap of the cupboard doors, he saw the man move towards the sink, slamming his axe on the side, and returned to whatever he was attending to. Zachary waited a couple of minutes until he felt it was safe to find another way out. Luckily, the cupboard he had hidden had another set of doors on the other side. The man was still at the sink, and Zachary quietly crawled out of the cupboard, back to the door leading into the corridor. Not making a noise, he had reached the door. But that's when he heard the same sickening, wheezing sound he heard before. Looking back quickly, he saw the man had seen him and had got his axe again. Zachary legged it. He slammed the door behind him and had to pick a door quickly. He picked one door and ducked into the room, closed the door, and had to push a shelving unit that was next to it to keep the man from getting in. But for how long? The heavy footsteps moved up and down the corridor outside. The man didn't know he was hiding in this room yet. Zachary had a small amount of time to find a way out of this room he was in. The windows were boarded and surrounded with barbed wire, and there were no other doors. He had to think quickly before the axe-wielding man came back to hack him to death. He looked around the room quickly, heart pelting, mouth going dry. Smash! The axe had struck against the door behind the shelves. Zachary was running out of time. Smash! There, in the corner, he could see what looked like some kind of trap door. He dashed to the corner. Smash! The axe blade was making its way through the shelves as wood chippings fell across the floor. Zachary grabbed the handle and tried lifting the door. Smash! The shelves fell apart and fell across the floor. There was now a big hole from all the blows of the man's axe. Zachary got the trapdoor open and jumped down, closing the trapdoor. The heavy footsteps entered the room above him. Had the man seen him? Zachary crawled across the dusty undersection of the house. Stomp, stomp went the man's footsteps. Zachary held his breath. Smack went the axe. The man started striking it against the floorboards. Zachary started crawling across faster. Smash! Again went the axe. Zachary, looking frantically in the gloom, saw a crawl space. He didn't care where it went right now. He just wanted to get away from this madman. Squeezing through the gap, he landed into the basement. Zachary leaned back into the brick wall, trying to catch his breath. Panting, he wiped the sweat from his forehead, wondering how long it would take for the man to realize where he was now. He looked around. There were some flashlights resting on containers and barrels. Zachary grabbed for one. No doubt he would need one to find his way around. He shined his lights around the basement. The basement was sort of like a maze. The passages led around corners with adjoining rooms. Every corner Zachary got to, he couldn't help but feel the man with the axe was waiting for him. But there were no heavy footsteps nearby, so he was safer now. Zachary had enough time to look around the basement. It was just as unsanitary as the rest of the house. The same awful stench, littered with rubbish. He saw what looked like a bed in the middle of a room. One of those beds hospital patients were wheeled around the corridors on. Zachary walked around it when he noticed some papers scattered across it. They looked like documents. Something about these caught his eye. He reached out for one of the documents on top of the pile. Most of these documents were covered with dirt, but this one looked sort of new. In the top left corner was a file photo of Zachary. Zachary stood there in astonishment, gripping the document. Just where did this document come from? What was this place? And who is that man with the axe? Zachary looked at his document. There was no mistake in the photograph. The document didn't have his name, age, or address, or anything. Just number 19, male, adult, black, next to his photo. He looked at the second photograph just below his file photo. It was a photo of his car, but it looked really banged up, like it had been involved in a car accident. Something struck him in the back of his mind, like something exploded. It was all coming back to him. Zachary remembered that he was visiting his friends in the next town. He was driving to them. His memory was blurry, but it was coming back. Then, a horrid crash. He then remembered being battered and banged around his car as it tumbled. He felt the cut on his forehead. He was in a car accident, but he still didn't understand why he was in this godforsaken place. Did that man with the axe find his wrecked car and abduct him? Was he even the one driving the other car and hid him here not to get into a lawsuit? He looked at the document again and saw what was typed in. Driver removed from crash scene and brought to restricted area. Currently awaiting development. That was all. Zachary then looked at the other documents. They had more details. Shuffling through the other documents, he noticed that they had more details typed in. Time elapsed: 20 minutes and 36 seconds. 5 minutes and 14 seconds. 37 minutes and 3 seconds. They all had terminated stamped across their photos. About a dozen men and women were listed here. Adult, teenager, middle-aged, white, black, Asian. Zachary felt his insides churn. Were these poor people victims of this psychopath? He folded and pocketed a few of these documents and hoped that if he ever got out of this place, he'd present these to the authorities and see that whoever this man is, that he'd be brought to justice. With the flashlight in hand, Zachary moved quickly, desperately looking for a way out. After moving about, he tried to find maybe a door or basement window. He saw a wooden door that led above, but it was also locked. Refusing to give up hope, he had to find something to break it open. This was a basement after all, and there had to be tools, anything. Searching quickly, he found a sledgehammer hung up on one of the walls. Returning to the basement door, he swung the sledgehammer and struck it. He struck at it again, and again. But that's when he heard the wheezes coming from another part of the basement. He had to work fast, for that man with the axe couldn't be far behind. Banging and swinging, he tried to make a hole big enough to squeeze through. The wheezing came again, and Zachary could hear the heavy footsteps against the concrete floor. After a few more swings, he made a hole wide enough for him to get through. Daylight seeped in, and he made his way out. Panting, Zachary made it into the open air. But there was no time to rest yet. He had to get as far away from this house as possible. So he ran. Running as fast as he could, he looked for a road, a car, anything. While running with the sledgehammer in hand, he noticed he was out in the middle of the wastelands. There were a few trees surrounding the area, but there was no time for sightseeing. He halted as there was a cross-wire fence which was about 7 feet tall and had barbed wire across the top. There was a road just beyond it. Frustration was kicking in. Zachary didn't have time to dig underneath, and would it even help if Zachary swung the sledgehammer on the fence? Would it even work? He took a couple of swings, desperate to get out of this place. But then, while he attempts to get free, there was a 4x4 coming down the road. Zachary waved frantically, hoping the driver would see him and help him. But it was no use. He felt a hand grip his shirt and pulled him down to the ground. Zachary didn't have a chance to swing his sledgehammer, but his captor stomped down hard on his wrist. Although pain was travelling up his arm, he only had enough time to look up at the man above him. The man was wearing some kind of bag over his head. Or was it a bag? It looked more like flesh. Pieces of flesh stitched together in several places. 2 holes for eyes were cut out in a wide shape, like a smile had been cut out also. And then, stop! He was out cold. Partially conscious, he could just see himself being dragged across the grounds by the man, and clutching the axe with his other hand, dragging him back to the house. He fell unconscious again. Moments later, Zachary found himself hung by his wrists in the basement he had been in earlier. And out of the dark doorway, he saw the man approach slowly and wheezing. That haunting mask, that unholy mask of his own design. The man dragged his axe across the concrete floor and looked up at Zachary for a moment. He closed his eyes, saying a silent prayer before the axe struck the top of his head. Zachary's demise had been displayed via monitor. "You did rather well, I'd say," said one of the scientists as he leaned back into his chair. "I was kind of rooting for this guy." "That was a close one, however," said his colleague. "Yeah, but we had our patrol cars surrounding the perimeter, so everything would have been under control, of course." The director entered the control room. "I see Project Axeman continues to be a success." The two scientists got up from their chairs to acknowledge the director's presence in the room. "Yes, sir, and we will have the team reset everything as soon as possible. Axeman is currently residing in his confinement, but we will have everything ready for the next subject, sir," said one of the scientists. The director nodded. "Very good. Once everything is ready, bring in the next subject. Hopefully, the next test will be more entertaining. My team of scouts are traveling to other countries. Hopefully we'll be able to find more interesting subjects to take part in our little project. Also, make sure that the documents are disposed of properly next time."